Today we'll be reading Unit 3, Lesson 1, finishing Explorations 2 and 3, pages 147 to 152. Exploration 2, Modeling the Genetic Basis for Artificial Selection. Human raised dogs long before they farmed land or raised chicken and sheep. Dogs were the first animals bred by people, beginning between 10,000 and 40,000 years ago. Dogs are different from wolves because of selective breeding. Dogs have smaller skulls, paws, and teeth. Their ears flop forward. They are more friendly than fierce and can sense some human emotion. Question 8. How might humans have influenced the inheritance of traits they found desirable in wolves? So wolves have traits that help them to survive in the places they live. So here's a picture of a wolf. So what humans would have done is that when they found wolves that were more accepting of people, that were nicer to people, that were a little smaller, a little easier to manage, they would have kept those dogs near them and raised them, and then they would have freed or killed off the wolves that were more aggressive towards humans. So that way, over time, you eventually get what is a common dog now. So even in today's dogs, you have differences in breeds, and you have some breeds that are more aggressive than others, some that are more territorial, some that are just meaner in general, and usually it's the smaller breeds that are more aggressive because they're so small. They're trying to appear bigger and mean, so that way they're less likely to get eaten. That's the reason small dogs do that. Whereas your larger breeds tend to be a little bit more gentle. Not always. There's obviously exceptions. Like a German Shepherd is more of a territorial breed. It's not necessarily aggressive unless you're in their territory, and not all German Shepherds are like that. So different breeds are bred for different reasons. So like the Saint Bernard they gave us. Saint Bernards were bred because they were gentle towards humans, and they could help find people trapped in the snow. That's why Saint Bernards were bred. German Shepherds are very loyal, typically. But much like humans, they're all different. So not all German Shepherds are created equal. Not all Saint Bernards are created equal. So artificial selection acts on heritable traits. In the early 1900s, experiments confirmed Mendel's idea that traits are controlled by factors inherited from one parent. Over time, new technologies and discoveries linked traits to DNA. DNA is genetic material in cells that is transferred from parent to offspring during reproduction. Genes are segments of DNA that produce specific traits. As understanding of inheritance advances, so do the ways humans affect the traits in organisms. Artificial selection makes traits that interest people more common in a population. Selective dog breeding can encourage obedience and a soft bite in some dogs. Question 9. A single gene determines if Chinese Shar-Peis will have a short and fluffy coat or a wrinkled coat. Two Shar-Peis that differ in coat type have different genotypes or phenotypes, or genotypes and phenotypes. Well, the answer would be genotypes and phenotypes, because their genes are going to determine what they look like. Breeding Shar-Peis so that they are more likely to have wrinkle skin is an example of natural or artificial selection. It would be artificial selection because you're choosing the trait. You're not letting it happen naturally based on their environment. It requires traits that are or are not inherited from parents. Just like natural selection, artificial requires them to be inherited traits. So they are inherited from the parents. Dog breeders do not make new traits. Instead, they cause traits that dogs already have to become more or less common in a population. They do this by deciding which dogs mate. Puppies are more likely to have desired traits if both of their parents have those traits. Artificial selection directs change in populations, and it can occur more quickly than with natural selection. Artificial selection outcomes are also more predictable than those of natural selection, because people control which individuals reproduce. Reproduction in nature may cause different traits to become more common in the population. Turn the page. We are skipping the do the math. It's just us talking about a Punnett square, and we've done these before when we went into cells and heredity, but you use a Punnett square to determine which trait is going to show up in the dogs. So you would cross the Chihuahuas, the short hair versus the long hair, to see if you cross two short-haired Chihuahuas, what would be the chances of getting a short-haired versus a long-haired, and the long hair is recessive. So in this case, 3/4 of the puppies that there's a 3/4 or 75% chance that the puppy from the two short-haired German Shepherd would make a long-haired, not German Shepherd, Chihuahua. So, and then based on the punning, so they just want you to fill in the chart and predict the ratio of short-haired to long-haired, and it's 3-1. So, artificial selection does not modify genes. Advances in the scientific understanding of genes and inheritance improve selective breeding programs. For example, recessive traits are not always visible in an organism. Understanding inheritance patterns can help breeders make recessive traits more or less common in a population, even if the traits cannot be seen in the parents. Humans are still finding new ways to influence desired traits in living things. Biologists now understand how to change genes directly using molecular tools. The process of changing genes directly is called genetic engineering. However, artificial selection does not change genes. It only influences how common existing traits are in a population. So basically, if you're changing the genes, you're doing genetic engineering. If you're not changing anything, but you're choosing desirable traits that already happen in that species, that's artificial selection. That's artificial selection. And then if it happens, if certain genes are getting chosen based on what the environment looks like and how well they survive, that trait lets that organism survive in the environment, that's natural selection. So question 15, read the text for each photo, decide if humans or environmental factors are influencing the trait. Identify each as an example of natural selection, genetic engineering, or artificial selection. So the first one is neon-colored zebrafish are produced when DNA from sea anemones, coral, or jellyfish is inserted into the genetic material of a wild-type zebrafish. So you're changing. So first you need to consider, is it natural or is it happening by humans? And in this case, if you're inserting when DNA is taken from another organism and inserted into a different organism, that's usually caused by humans. So I would say the zebrafish are a result of human intervention. And so now you have to determine if it's artificial selection, which is just choosing certain traits, or if it's genetic engineering, which is changing the genes. And in this situation, you're taking the genes from one organism and putting it into a different organism. So this would be genetic engineering for the neon-colored zebrafish right here. And the second one, you can see them there, those are strawberries. Dutch farmers carefully bred the pineberry or reverse strawberry over several years. So it's a reverse strawberry because it's, instead of having whitish, yellowish, cream-colored seeds and a red flesh, it's whitish, creamish, yellowish flesh with red seeds. Over several years, so cultivation begins by crossing a nearly extinct white strawberry plant with a red strawberry plant to get these fruit. So, again, it's human intervention, so it's either going to be artificial selection or genetic engineering. And because the farmers are crossing the plants, this would be an example of selecting a specific trait. So it would be artificial selection. They're not changing any of the genetics. They're just using the genetics that are already there to choose what happens. Farmers want dairy cows to produce as much high-fat milk as possible. The DNA of beef and dairy cows have differences in genes that control milk production. So again, the farmers are going to want a certain trait. So this is an example of human intervention. And because they're choosing a trait and not inserting any DNA, it again would be artificial selection. And then the last one, this hummingbird's bill is long and curved. Its food source is nectar, which is found deep in flowers. Some flowers have long tube shapes. This is an example of an environmental factor that causes a change. So this would be natural selection. So there's a picture of the dairy cows. There's a picture of the hummingbirds. Turn the page. Exploration 3, applying artificial selection to solve problems. Artificial selection as a biotechnology. Artificial selection is a type of biotechnology, which means the use of biological understanding to solve practical problems. The root word technology implies that people use creativity to design and implement biological solutions. Using yeast to produce yogurt and cheese is biotechnology. Other examples are using bacteria to make antibiotics, to break down sewage, or to clean up oil spills. In each case, people use advances in the scientific understanding of a biological process to solve a problem or improve the quality of life. Question 16. Is natural selection considered a biotechnology? Why or why not? The answer is no. Since humans cannot control natural selection, it happens naturally due to the environment, it is not considered a biotechnology because biotechnology is something that humans can control, that humans are doing. And natural selection is not something that humans do. Case study, artificial selection of coral. In 2005, the Caribbean lost 50% of its coral reefs due to the rise in the area's ocean temperatures. Warm water causes corals to get rid of the algae living in their tissues. This process is called bleaching. The bleached coral becomes weaker. Some corals may die from lack of food without the photosynthetic algae to provide nutrients. Artificial selection might help corals become more tolerant of warm temperatures. Coral species from Australia have adapted to warmer waters. Breeding corals from Australia with ones found in colder regions introduces warm tolerance genes into more coral species. Scientists can continue selective breeding to increase the total number of coral with these genes. These tanks are full of corals from different world regions. Selectively breeding coral types might help improve a coral species' ability to resist threats in its environment. Coral. So basically they're crossing coral that lives in warm oceans with coral that lives in cooler oceans, and because the global climate is changing and things are getting warmer, the coral that survives in the cold oceans is living in warmer waters, so it's dying because it can't survive well in warm waters. So by crossbreeding, taking the warm water coral and crossing it with the cold water coral, they're getting cold water coral that also now has genes to survive in warmer waters. So it's less likely that the coral reefs will die or die as quickly. Meeting needs and desires. When humans use artificial selection to protect coral, they are helping meet a variety of human needs and desires. Coral reefs are beautiful. This makes them a favorite spot for tourists to visit. Companies around reefs such as ecotourism companies, hotels, restaurants, and local fisheries provide many jobs. Coral reefs are also areas of high biodiversity. Therefore, there are many species and many individuals present. Ocean algae that live among reef systems provide a large percentage of the oxygen in Earth's air. Some medicines also come from coral reefs. For example, an enzyme used by corals to fight disease is an ingredient in medicines used to treat asthma and arthritis. Protecting reefs through artificial selection will also protect these valuable resources. So there's a coral reef system. Healthy reef systems support nearly 44,000 species of fish. Scientists think there may be over 1 million undiscovered species that also live among the world's coral reefs. Question 17. What criteria must be met for artificial selection to be a successful solution to coral bleaching and the long-term success of coral reefs? Select all that apply. A. Corals must have variation in their abilities to survive changing temperatures. This would be true. B. The trait being influenced in corals must be beneficial to humans. This is false. It doesn't have to benefit humans. Not all corals benefit humans, but we still need them to survive for the benefits of other animals. C. The offspring of corals must be able to reproduce in nature. This would be a criteria that is needed. If it can't produce in nature, then it's not. Why would you make it? D. The ability to survive changing temperatures must involve heritable traits. This is true. That's if corals are dying due to changing temperature, they want to be able to produce coral that has the gene to survive those changing temperatures and then pass that gene on to future generations. E. The artificial selection process must not harm healthy coral reefs, and this is true. You don't want to cause more damage than has already been caused. Turn the page. Engineer it, evaluating use of artificial selection. Ocean water is also becoming more acidic. Higher acidity prevents corals from using carbonate to build their skeletons. An effective artificial selection solution would help corals hold on to algae. It would also increase the amount of carbonate corals uptake in increasingly warm and acidic ocean water. 2 proposed solutions are given in the table. So farming coral in several conditions is one solution, exposing lab-raised coral to stress. So if you're farming corals in several conditions, so this is when coral are grown in different acidity levels with different algae in order to find and breed the healthiest combination of coral and algae to survive in those conditions. Exposing lab-raised coral to stress. Scientists think that the DNA of stress corals changes in a way that makes them better able to withstand the same stress if it would happen again in the future. So corals that can best tolerate stress are chosen for the breeding program. So question 19, what do the proposed solutions for reducing coral bleaching have in common? Select all that apply. A, they both include Beowulf. A, they both include identifying variation in traits. This is true. B, they both include selectively breeding corals for desired traits. This is also true. C, they both include selectively breeding algae for desirable traits. Well, the algae is important, but we're focusing on the coral, so this one's does not apply. They both depend on environmental factors to alter DNA, coral DNA. This is not true because the farming coral and the exposing lab-raised coral to stress is both human intervention, needs human intervention. So that does not apply. So we're skipping question 20. Analyzing the impacts of artificial selection on society. Today's juicy corn is a result of thousands of years of selective breeding. Just 5 genes areas caused the differences between corn and teosinte, corn's ancestor. Farmers planted only seeds from plants with larger kernels or more cobs. Now advances in genetics allow farmers to encourage pest and drought resistance in corn. Corn has become a super crop, grown in large amounts to meet many needs. So question 21 asked, how have important crops that have been highly influenced by humans breeding, such as corn, impacted society? Well, if we select desirable traits in corn, it increases the amount of corn that we produce. So a human population, as the human population increases, as we have more and more people, we need more and more food. So we depend on food crops. And we depend on how much food crop we are able to produce. So being able to grow corn in vast amounts will help. And if we use artificial selection or biotechnology to keep pests away, then the more likely that those crops will survive and make food for the people. So, and it also, sometimes they can genetically modify it to reduce the amount of water they need. So that way we aren't using up as much water, which is better for the environment. Your assignment for today is to work on your test. You can use the video lessons to fill it out as you go. You can use your book. You can use an online resource if you feel like that would be more beneficial. The test goes in order by lesson and by exploration. The questions go in order. Some of the questions are definitions. They're in red. They're colored red. So you can look up those definitions in the back in your glossary in your book or on your online glossary and find the definition, the vocab word that would match your definition. So when you get, that is not due until the 19th for Black Day students and the 20th for Gold Day students. So you have a while to work on it, but that is the only thing that will be assigned today.